It's actually kind of interesting because we didn't scan New York City. So it's not an
Okay.
exact replica of New York City, even though sometimes it feels like it. We just really, I mean, to me, there's two things. One, I always think about New York City as the New York City in your dreams or in your memory, right? So
Okay.
I've been to New York City many times, and every time I come back, I have this impression of New York. So that's what I put into the game. So when I think about New York City, and obviously I'm in Los Angeles, so it's very different, right? I think about things like, red brick buildings, all the yellow taxi cabs you see everywhere, fire escapes. If you go there in fall, it's crazy, but there's always all the steam just coming out of
Yeah.
the vents and the sidewalk. And I don't even know why that happens, but I think it's really cool. So we take a lot of that information and we just put more of it into the game. So it feels
Okay.
more like New York City. And at the same time, we can't duplicate the entire city, so we have to pick and choose the landmarks that we choose to build as well. So it's a way more condensed version of New York City. The variety of terrain that you now see, because Manhattan's really the part of New York City I think most people are familiar with. That's where you get Times Square, you get the financial district, and all of the major landmarks that you remember about New York City, like the Empire State Building. Um, so a lot of tall skyscrapers. And then also we have Central Park because a lot of the city is built around Central Park. But when you cross to the other boroughs, what's different about it is you just don't see as many skyscrapers. So everything is a lot lower. And there's even some parts like the residential areas. So, when you go to Brooklyn, that's where Miles Morales is from. You can see Marvel landmarks like the Brooklyn Visions Academy.
Hmm.
One of my favorite places in Brooklyn is being able to go over to Coney Island. That's that
Hmm.
amusement park, by the water, obviously. But to be able to swing over there, land on the boardwalk, and really just see that amusement park, walk into the sand and into the water is just so different than being in an area with skyscrapers. And then Queens is where Peter Parker is from. You're going to be able to see Aunt May's house, which is where Peter Parker lives now. But that whole area has more like residential areas too. So it's really
Hmm.
neat to be able to swing through this residential area as well. And obviously there's places of business and other, kind of small neighborhoods in those boroughs. But I think what's really cool about it is just that variety of environments. There's different parks there. There's a lot of kind of industrial stuff too, so you might see more warehouses and docks as well. But to me, what's also incredible about this is just being able to swing across the bridge and know
Hmm.
that you can still swing just as well in these buildings, around these buildings, even though
Okay.
they're lower. I think that's actually quite a feat that we're able to accomplish, that you can just go seamlessly and it doesn't really change the gameplay, but the environment is very different. There's three categories of suits in Spider-Man. One are the comic book suits, so we'll grab suits from the comic books and we'll bring those to life. The second category are suits from the movies. The movie suits are obviously wildly popular.
Hmm.
And then the third category are suits that are from the game narrative, so they're unique to the game and the story and our universe, or they may be the custom design suits that we decide to just add to the Spider-Man universe. And then in those three categories, we we pick the suits according to our own taste, but also in terms of just making sure we have a good enough variety. So we want to bring back some suits, from the first two games.
Hmm.
We also want to add some new suits. But sometimes we'll say things like, oh, it'd be nice to get a suit with a cape, like the Arachnite suit. But we don't want to have too many suits with a cape, so maybe we'll choose a different one. And maybe this one has a sweatshirt, like Miles' anniversary suit.
Okay.
We just want to have a large variety, but it's very difficult to please everybody because I know everyone wants every suit. Venom's classic, beloved in all the comics. Black and white spider, much much larger than Spider-Man. So I looked at the comics first and observed how Venom was done in the past, and it's actually very interesting because Venom varies in size. So sometimes he's almost, he's upright, he's very human looking, and other times he's kind of, hunched over and he's almost like a monster. He's like an
Hmm.
animal. And even how the artists have drawn tentacles in the past, because the tendrils actually, for the venom attacks. Like, so, sometimes they're very angular, and they're bundled. They're bundles of tendrils, and other times maybe it's a single strand. So even the style of the different tendrils has been very different across the comic books. And then you look at what they did in the movies, and then the movies are almost completely different, where it's like much smoother and not, as angular as a lot of stuff in the comics. So then, we take a look at to see how they do both. But for us, looking at the comics, which obviously has the most reference, we have to figure out how to translate that 2D image into 3D. And one really good example of that is really the mouth. Like,
Okay.
oftentimes in the comics, you'll see only two sides of Venom. You see him from the front, where he's smiling and he has a square jaw and he looks really menacing. But then other times you see him, his mouth is like wide open, and he's, his mouth full of teeth. But in the comics, you don't really have any reference for how he gets from the closed mouth version to the open mouth version.
Okay.
So we were looking at all of that reference, and we had to figure out how to do that. And one thing we noticed was that he's changing shapes constantly, and it was really hard to figure out how to do that in 3 dimensions, because his jaw is changing shape, or maybe the number of teeth is changing. So eventually we came to the conclusion that Venom is a symbiote, and he can change shape anytime he wants. So we just said, okay, so his jaw actually changes shapes during his animations. Starts out with a square jaw. It almost is hinged like a human, with a jawbone. But as soon as he opens his mouth, the jaw unhinges, and then that jawbone dissolves or disappears, and it elongates, and then all the teeth come out. They actually splay out, and they can elongate and they animate. And then his jaw is completely dislocating, so you can see all the tendrils stretching on the hinge of the jaw. So for us, that was something that we spent a really, really long time on, because it's not something that really is shown in the comics. And in the movies, things happen so quickly, you don't have as many slow moments where you actually have to show this happening, So that's just one of many challenges we solved. Sandman was also a challenge because, in the comics, it's like this, very large man made out of sand. But one of the first questions we had to ask was, does he have legs?
Okay.
Does he have legs? Is he more like a genie? Is he going to be just floating, with a big sand cloud under him? And then same thing with Sandman. We also have to figure out how big he was, because he can also be any size. So same thing, we made a Sandman, and then we just put him at different scales around the city, and then we just played it until it felt right, because if he was too tall, you got away from the buildings, so you weren't really able to see like the buildings or kind of get that sense of speed. And even if he's too small, it didn't really fulfill your fantasy of fighting Sandman, because he didn't feel very intimidating. So we actually would experiment with different sizes as well.